Welcome to the Cake Therapy Podcast, a slice of joy and healing with your host, Dr. Altricia Foster. This is a heartwarming and uplifting space that celebrates the transformative power of baking therapy. The conversations will be a delightful blend of inspirational stories, expert insights, and practical baking tips. Each episode will take listeners on a journey of self-discovery, emotional healing, and connection through the therapeutic art of baking. There's something here for everyone, so lock in and let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cake Therapy Podcast, your slice of joy and healing. So today we have like an exciting guest, someone who's a favorite of mine in the culinary art field. Um, 3 years ago, I stumbled upon Julie's website, and I've been a fan. I watched Julie cook. Her Instagram feed is to die for. So who is Julie? Julie is she's earned her BA in counseling from SUNY Empire State College in 2001. She is a social worker, and she's had the honor and privilege of sharing her skills with a number of people across the US and across the world. Her form of therapy is blended with food and love and passion, and I'm really excited to have her here today. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much. It is such a joy to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us a little bit more about who Julie is. I've been dying. I've been dying to know who you are. So share with our listeners and with me, of course. Who's
Sure.
Julie? Yeah.
So it's really, I wish I had some like crazy, exciting story to tell, but
Yeah.
really it all started for me as a young girl sitting. I can picture myself sitting in one of those like little tight plastic, like toddler chairs that
Mm-hmm.
was perched in front of the oven in my home, my mom's kitchen.
Yeah.
And watching, I don't even know what was in the oven, but
Mm-hmm.
just sitting there with my mom and my sister next to me, and having this experience in the kitchen that was just really, like you said, it's all about wrapped up in love. And
Mm-hmm.
I, from a very young age, just knew that something magical could happen in the kitchen. And so much of those experiences that, we spend cooking and gathering and connecting with people all
Mm-hmm.
around food really did foster so many wonderful benefits, for ourselves and for our
Mm-hmm.
lives, that I knew there was something there. So when I was in graduate school, flash forward now about 20 some years, um, we had to write a master's thesis, and we could write a topic on whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
I don't even think I ever considered anything else other than writing about how cooking can be therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. And doing research back then, this was about 25 years ago. No, about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The topic was the research capabilities were very different, and
Yeah.
it was a struggle to find really good research. But what I
Mm-hmm.
did find is that lots of people and organizations were doing this kind of work. They just weren't calling it what I was calling it.
Okay.
So it was really about making the connection and showing people the power of cooking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's where it all began.
Yeah. So you mentioned family. Tell me a little bit more about your family background. Do you have children? Like, do you
Yeah.
cook with them? Yeah. Tell me a little bit
Oh
more
yeah.
about yeah.
So I grew up. I have one older sister, and my parents and
Mm-hmm.
grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. And of course, I think like many families, so many of our holidays and our rituals are centered around food and
Mm-hmm.
meals. So that was really ingrained in me, and so much a part of my culture, my Jewish culture, about those food memories.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got married to my wonderful husband, who also loves to cook, and he's a wonderful cook, and we have two kids. We have a 11 and a half-year-old son who is quite the food chemist,
Okay.
and my 13-year-old daughter who's more of the baker.
Mm-hmm.
They love being in the kitchen, and I think we've tried to instill in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's where all the magic happens. that the kitchen is a place for people to gather and to connect and
Mhm.
express their feelings and express connection and, good or bad. It's a place where it can all be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did mention that you are of the Jewish faith, and I wanted to pause and acknowledge to find out like how are you doing? Is your family okay? Do you still have family members in Israel? Like how are you doing in this moment? How
Thank
is
you.
everything going?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. I lived in Israel for a number of years, and I
Yeah.
do have Israeli citizenship, and my husband is Israeli. My mother-in-law, brother-in-law, lots of aunts and uncles and cousins are in Israel.
Mhm.
They are alive. They are
Yeah.
traumatized.
Mhm.
It's terrifying times, and
Yeah.
as a people, we are struggling. And I definitely, I'm sure you see on my Instagram page, which was a very conscious thought. Do I share that with the world or not? And I think
Mhm.
it's important. I am a deep believer in being
Yeah.
authentically ourselves. And for
Mhm.
me, so much of that is wrapped up in my culture and my religion and my faith.
Mhm.
Um, so that's how we're that's how we're showing our feelings,
Mhm.
good or bad,
Yeah.
coming through in the kitchen, and our comfort food, our need for comfort food right now,
Mhm.
and just hoping for peace for everyone.
Yeah. You know what I do notice and I can appreciate about you, Julie, is you know the science and the importance of what food does. And I noticed that how you've been bringing everyone together on your feed around food. You're using food as the tool that you know and you're so familiar with to
Yeah,
really go through and deal with like what's going on. So kudos to you, man. Like
thank you.
you've empowered a lot of us foodies to really tap into to what's there and what the power of what baking or cooking can do for them.
Yeah, I say this in sessions all the time that there's so much in this world that we cannot control, right? We don't
Hmm.
have the power and the control over so much. And that really is one of the benefits of being in the kitchen, is that we do have that sense of control. We do have a sense of ownership. And I think
Hmm.
in times like these that are just so many people are just feeling so powerless,
Yeah.
it can help alleviate some of that by feeling like there is some sense of control in our lives.
Yeah. So for me it's I've been getting to know you from the electronic side of things. And what I've found out is that Julie has been like really owning and fostering this dream of the culinary arts. Since she was a child. I read somewhere that you were managing the kitchen at your summer camp. Girl, tell me about that experience and
Yeah.
share with our listeners, right?
So,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
I grew up going to the summer camp that actually is the same camp where my kids go now, which is amazing and
Hmm.
definitely a home away from home. And I spent a couple summers as a counselor, being in a bunk with younger kids, which was wonderful. But at
Hmm.
that time, I felt most comfortable in the kitchen. So
Hmm.
that's how I was able to pitch in and show my support and help of this place that I love so much, was by managing the kitchen, which was
Yeah.
great. And I'm laughing because I actually spent a week there this past summer,
Wow.
volunteering, helping them in the kitchen. And
Mhm.
I just laugh because the way that it works as a 45-year-old versus doing it as an 18 and a 19-year-old was very different.
Right.
Um, but it was fun. It was fun. It was hard work. It's exhausting, but to me, there's no better way to show your love than by nurturing people, by feeding them.
Yeah. So growing up for you, were you were your family really fellowshiped around food? As a teenager or even a preteen, were you actively in the kitchen?
I was.
And as you were in the kitchen, what was like baking doing for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think back, I think I was in high school, probably early high school. So maybe I was 14-ish.
Mhm.
I remember coming home from school, and everybody talks about like kids come home from school and they're just starving and they just want a snack. And
Mhm.
for me, yes, I came home starving and wanted that snack, but for me, it was actually more about preparing the food. And it was later in life that I realized, when we come home from a long day, it's really important to have that time to decompress.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing. I took to the
Mhm.
kitchen. I remember chopping vegetables and making salads and making, mixtures of vegetables and cream cheese and puff pastry. It was about the process to be creative, that process of unwinding and decompressing and being able to kind of be reflective of the day that was,
Mhm.
so that I could move forward and recharge and continue on with my day.
Mhm.
So I very much remember doing that at that age, and I'm sure at the time, I don't know that I realized what I was doing. I thought
Mhm.
I was getting my own snack,
Yeah.
but it really was later when I looked back and I realized, "Oh, that's what I was doing. That's
Yeah.
what was going on."
Yeah, and it's important, I believe, to find a space in your day where you can actually decompress, even as a child, right? Because
Yeah,
there's got to be some transition from just going through
yeah,
the rigorous, I would say, class schedule to
right.
coming home and then unwinding and to be
Yeah,
able to do other things.
absolutely, that energy has to go somewhere
Mm-hmm.
for kids and for adults. Even now, I most of the time I do most of my sessions virtually, so I
Mm-hmm.
work from home. And one of my favorite parts about my job is I go from sessions to having a break, and I'll prep dinner for my family or
Mm-hmm.
make myself lunch. And I really that ability to kind of use both sides of my brain to go from the professional to the personal and
Yeah.
do that decompressing and that recharging for myself in my
Mm-hmm.
kitchen is just it's one of the things that I appreciate the most throughout my day.
And you know what? I could tell because like when I browse your Instagram timeline, the food is just so colorful, but I could tell you're actually doing something that you really love. And you had mentioned earlier about being authentic, and your authenticity shows. It shows
Oh,
on your page. It shows how you do your food, you present your food, and it shows that cooking is an integral part of who you are. So kudos to you for doing that.
thank
And
you.
yeah, and I thought about you and the work you do as I was writing my book and as I was leaning into the cake therapy. Because as I was leaning into cake therapy, I was like, who else is doing this? What is the science saying? Like, and that's when I stumbled on you,
I
right?
love that.
And yeah, it really did send me to you because I knew that I understood the power of what baking was doing for me, that it was healing me in the moments when I was doing it. I wanted to know if the science was saying the same thing. What
Yeah,
I'm feeling is science saying that this is occurring.
right.
So I was really happy about that. And then leading into this podcast and the release of my book, I definitely thought that I needed to shine the light on alternative forms of therapy. In my case, it was baking, mind you, I'm not a therapist. But through the Cake Therapy Foundation and the interactions with other therapists and licensing professions, I did figure out that baking could truly be a medium of
Yeah.
therapy. So tell me about how you how you decided to incorporate this work into what Julie does as a therapist.
Yeah, it's so interesting because for many years I kind of kept it separate. I
Mhm.
kind of thought it was something. I do talk therapy and I do culinary art therapy.
Yeah.
And they definitely have moments where they are separate. I
Mhm.
do a lot of group sessions with culinary art therapy, which is group work in general is very
Y
different and what I love it so much.
Mhm.
But now as I'm working, I'm realizing that there's so many techniques from culinary art therapy to integrate it even into talk therapy.
Yeah.
This is how the world is evolving, which is so exciting to me, is
Mhm.
that people they're craving, they're open to alternative approaches. They
Yes.
want the ability to do things in a unique way that works for them.
Mhm.
Therapy, like so many other professions and approaches in life, can't be cookie cutter. It can't
Yeah.
be, no pun intended,
Yeah.
it really is not supposed to be like a one size fits all. People
Mm-hmm.
are all different and we all have different needs.
Yeah.
It's really about figuring out what are the tools that I can use from culinary therapy and integrate it into my practice on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. So, writing a master's thesis around, the therapeutic value of cooking, no doubt, I think kind of gave you a blueprint, to
Yeah.
see how this was definitely going to work. And as you were merging these things, at what point, at what point did you realize that, wow, this is really transforming my patients' lives? Like, when did you get that aha?
It did not happen during the writing of my thesis.
Yeah.
Because back then I felt very alone in this field. I felt like I was kind of the crazy one. And, were people going to look at me crazy and think like, this is so out there? What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And it has been an evolution since that point 20 years ago. The world is just so different and people
Yeah.
are so much more open-minded, and we're also so, we're able to connect more. That's how we wouldn't have met 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and that is definitely, I will give social media that credit for sure.
Yeah.
It is definitely one of the pluses. And there are a group of us that really do similar work and that
Yeah.
want to collaborate and want to grow this field and want to, share it with the world and get it all out there so that more people can be positively impacted.
Yes, absolutely. Because I do see a lot of alignment with cake therapy, culinary art therapy. So I'm really excited about some
Yeah.
future collaboration of us in the kitchen in the
Oh
future,
yeah.
girl. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely looking forward to something like that. Um, you once wrote that culinary art therapy is a delicious therapeutic experience. You mentioned that there was a reverence to the process of preparing food from scratch, cooking it on, and then all enjoying it. Everyone's enjoying that food. So
Yeah.
there's reverence, there's community, there's kingship, and that sounds like the perfect backdrop for exploring, releasing, and healing. You call them powerful experiences. Walk us through working with a client or a group for a session.
So every session looks a little bit different because, like I
Mhm.
said, we're all different, have different needs. But the framework of how I do my sessions tends to be somewhat similar. So
Mhm.
I always start with a questionnaire that I give my client, just for me to get to know who's coming to me. What are their goals for themselves? What are their
Mhm.
needs? What are their food preferences? What are their favorite flavors? Do they have any allergies? Do they have any food aversions? What's the relationship with food been like? If
Yeah.
someone is
Mhm.
coming from a place of trauma, that's looking very different than someone that's coming from a place of a positive experience. It's very different. And it's not to say they both aren't powerful. I need to be sensitive and come into the session differently to approach those two things differently.
Mhm.
So I gather as much information as I can. Once I have all that information, then I make a suggestion of a menu or a recipe that will be cooking in the session. That I always want my clients to say yes or no
Mhm.
they're in charge. Um, and then we cook. Sometimes I'm cooking along with my clients. Sometimes I'm not cooking, but I'm guiding them. I'm coaching them. I'm being the therapist. I'm
Yeah.
being focused in my mindset of discussion and questions and allowing them to really learn from the experience and learn
Mhm.
from the things that are coming up during the
Yes.
session. And then there's always a summary discussion of what was this like? What did you learn? What did you
Mhm.
realize? What did you feel? And then ideally, the client is then getting to enjoy their meal, whether
Mhm.
it's that we're eating together or they're bringing it to a loved one, family members, friends, whatever it might be. But there's definitely, that last piece of the experience is being able to enjoy the fruits of someone's hard work with
Yeah.
people in their lives.
Yeah. It's all about the accomplishment and the height, the pleasure that you get from having achieved that. Um Mindfulness.
Exactly.
It's yeah. Tell me, for listeners, because we have listeners who are really entrenched in the cake community, because I own a premier baking company. I'm joking. I own cake, sugar spoon desserts as well.
Yeah.
So, for some of our listeners who aren't, aware of the term mindfulness, what is mindfulness, Julie?
So this is how I explain it.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people are familiar with the idea of meditation, right?
Yeah.
You picture somebody doing a yoga class, and they're sitting there, legs crossed, their arms out, doing their breathing, count whatever they're doing, and they're being present in the moment. And that meditation is a
Mm-hmm.
form of mindfulness. Now, if you're like me and you
Yeah.
have a real hard time sitting still,
Yeah.
I can't do yoga. It's just like I'm going, going, going. It's very hard
Mm-hmm.
for me to just physically remain that still
Yeah.
to be present in that experience of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I practice that by chopping vegetables,
Ooh.
by kneading dough, by
Mm-hmm.
doing these repetitive motions, just like you would be, whether you're counting or you're focusing on your breath, it allows the person to really be present in the moment, paying attention to the here and now, and leaving yesterday in the past and leaving tomorrow in the future, and
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on today. That is to me how I define mindfulness.
Okay, cool. So in your sessions, like of cooking and being intentional about being mindful in this
Yeah.
space, um, it tends to engage one's senses. You
Yep.
mentioned also that it supports one's brain development, like
Yep.
food in itself. How does this happen?
There
Tell us. Like,
Yeah, there's so many executive functioning is definitely getting a workout when you're in the kitchen,
mm-hmm,
because you're engaging so many senses, so many things that you have to do. When you picture you're working with a sharp knife, right?
mm-hmm,
There's a safety element here that you have to be present in that moment because you don't want to get hurt. You don't want to cut yourself. So you have to be paying attention. You have to be mindful of your finger placement, how you're holding that knife, focusing, looking at what you're doing, and really, again, throwing yourself into those moments while also kind of thinking about, okay, what does this recipe take? What are the ingredients do I need? Do I need to preheat my oven? Am I mixing? What's coming up next? So it's that really good balance of right brain, left brain, engaging
mm-hmm.
those senses, and your brain just gets a workout.
Yeah. Just sitting here and like listening to you describe how one's brain is being developed, through the whole process of being in the kitchen, I started thinking about like the stigma that's around traditional forms of therapy, right? And especially in places in the Caribbean, like where I'm from, where people tend to think that going to therapy means that they're mentally impaired or like it stains them, it stains their family. Do you think that combining like maybe talk therapy with other modalities and providing people with alternatives altogether would get them working through some of this stuff?
I sure do. I really do. And it's sad. I think you're right that there definitely are still lots of places in this world and lots of communities where there is still, unfortunately, a stigma about therapy, that something is wrong with you if you're in
Yeah.
therapy. But here's the thing, we all have to eat. We all
Yeah.
eat, right? And chances are, there's probably very few people that are going out to eat every single meal every single day who can
Hmm.
do that.
Yeah.
So chances are people are doing some kind of food preparation.
Hmm.
So there definitely is less stigma there, because if you're thinking about what you're doing, there's no stigma about cooking.
Hmm.
So if we can work in, some therapeutic elements to that cooking process, I
Hmm.
definitely think it provides a lower barrier for people to give it a try, because you're cooking.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to cook.
Exactly. And who doesn't like food, right? Who doesn't like food?
Nobody
I
I know.
No, I know, because I think food is the one thing that we all have in common here.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
everyone likes to eat things that are good, and people in general, even my kids, they like being in the kitchen making their own food.
Yes.
And I see on my notes here, my producer sent over like one of your favorite quotes, or one of the quotes you've said in the past was, when a person has the ability to relax and engage in something creative, fun, and inspiring, they have the ability to feel freer, more vulnerable, honest, and ready to be connected or connect with the world. And
Yes.
just, yeah.
So the analogy that I compare that to, for anybody who has kids, specifically like teenage kids, if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever been in the car, you're driving, your teenager sitting next to you, there's something magical that kind of happens that the teenager will feel a little bit more comfortable and able to open up. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because it's less intimidating. You're not sitting face to face, needing to make eye contact, having the pressure of knowing that all eyes are on you. There's kind of that side distraction of being in the car and driving.
Yeah.
And the same thing when you're in the kitchen. When you know, yes, you're working with me, you have a therapist right there, but you're kind of doing your thing. You're focused on what you're doing. You don't necessarily have to be looking at the eye or in the eye or feeling like you're being watched quite as closely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really does allow people to feel a greater sense of comfort, which
Mm-hmm.
then allows them to want to open up more.
Yeah.
And the talking just kind of flows a little bit freer.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that the talking, being freer, is it coming from of an association with food and memory? Like, what do you think is driving that
I
conversation?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit different for everybody based on their past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you're like me and you're coming to a session with a really strong positive past experience with food and cooking, yes, I think those positive memories definitely evoke more positive feelings and it makes it easier. For
I
some
see.
people, it's just that pressure of like the less eye contact, the focusing on another movement.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little bit different for everybody, and that's another benefit of it is that there's different parts that work in different ways for different
Yeah.
people based on what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like when I started baking, I tell people the story all the time. It's like I started baking in the 8th month of my second pregnancy, just because I couldn't travel for work anymore.
Yeah,
But then what I found from that is that all the repressed feelings that I had
yeah,
for decades,
yeah,
they started to
come,
bubble up and
right,
emerge through this baking. And I
yeah,
often wonder, like, is it me sitting still that caused all of this to happen, or like what was it about this whole baking
right,
process that
right.
that
It's
brought me to my knees?
Yeah, it's a great question,
Yeah.
and I hope scientifically it's one we'll have more evidence-based information one day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they say that the sense of smell is the strongest sense tied to memory,
Yeah.
and for me, I think part of it being in the kitchen, especially with baking, when the aromas and the smells are just all over the place, I
Mm-hmm.
think that does cause a stir in memories and thoughts to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's fascinating. It's a
It is.
beautiful process.
It really is a beautiful process, because I'm telling you, when once I started baking, I started healing. Right? No
Yeah,
one can. That's what it happened. All of any form of childhood trauma that I experienced,
yeah.
I healed from because I actually baked.
Wow.
And what stood out to me a lot in your work is that you had many years of experiences working with adolescents and their parents. And when I read that, I thought, this kind of is working magic for me and my mom in the kitchen, just baking. And that's why, when I thought about my nonprofit, the Cake Therapy Foundation, and how I'm targeting just systems impacted girls. Do you get to work a lot, with the cross section of impacted individuals in your practice?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, like you mentioned, cooking is something that really does allow a place for people of all ages, of all
Mm-hmm.
generations, of, such a cultural, like it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, but cooking appeals and there's a need for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think there is something really powerful when you do bring those different generations into the kitchen together and
Mm-hmm.
work on something together. It really is a fantastic experience.
Yeah, yeah. And not only is it fantastic, it's healing, right? And it's healing from generational trauma. It's teaching women and girls how to communicate with their parents. There is a foundation and fundamental part of this that
Yeah.
is really improving communication. Um, Culinary therapy and how it impacts families.
Yes.
Uh, Talk to me a little bit more about what do you see, when what emerges from this space when you
Right.
have these sessions.
So
Yeah.
as we know, everybody plays their role, right? We all have
Mhm.
our role that we are in our family, whether it's the siblings, the parents, everybody kind of takes on this unspoken title, role, position in the family. And the ability for those roles to shine through in the kitchen, it never ceases to amaze me.
Mhm.
But you're able to address them, I think, in a very different way in the kitchen versus outside of the kitchen. Part of that is because you're actually seeing it in action, which is
Mhm.
wonderful. You're not talking in theory. You're not talking about something that happened in the past or just in generalities. You're actually seeing it in real live time.
Mhm.
And even though cooking and being in the kitchen is so important and it's so great, really, when you think about it, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when you're baking, something doesn't turn out. It doesn't work out. It's not what you wanted it to be or what you anticipated it to be. The world's not going to come to a crashing halt, right?
Mhm.
And I think for so many families, when you're talking how do roles play out and you give them the opportunity to let them play out and know that the stakes are low, that if things don't come out the way you want them to, it's okay. We
Yeah.
can learn from those failures, or we can actually see the potential for things to work out when you don't think they will. I
Yeah.
remember working with a family years ago, and there was a little boy in the family who was really kind of tapped as like the problem child. Um, and watching him in the kitchen with his family, where he wanted to do things a certain way, and nobody was really letting him because there's no way that he would be able to come up with something on his own that would be successful. And I stepped in and I said to the family, hold on a second. He's not following the recipe. He's not doing it according to what the directions are,
Mhm.
but let's let him try. What
Mhm.
could happen? What's the worst case if this dessert doesn't turn out the way the recipe says? Okay.
Yeah.
And we did it his way. The parents were kind of like, "Oh, okay, we'll go with it." And
Mhm.
they did. To their credit, they were able to kind of pull it in and relinquish some of that control over to their child.
Yeah.
He did it his way, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was a success. And for the power and the degree of confidence that this helped this little boy feel, and for his parents to see, like, he's capable, he can do things.
Mhm.
It was huge, and it was all about making this like no bake dessert.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, this is like a really perfect segue, I believe, to our listeners who are girls, who the Cake Therapy Foundation would potentially impact, or who, the foundation has impacted. Talk to them, Julie, about where they are now
Yeah.
and the potential of foundations, such as, cake therapy or even culinary art therapy or
Yeah.
other traditional, the power that lies in that,
Yes.
and how it will take them from where they are to where, we know and see, they can be.
Right. There are so many lessons and tools that can be learned in the kitchen that I think everybody hopefully has access to. You don't need this isn't about becoming a James Beard award-winning chef. That's great. That's wonderful. But this isn't about that. This is about learning the skills and the tools to help yourself and to
Mhm.
become the strong, powerful women that everybody should have the capability of being.
Yeah.
And I think being able to have that in the kitchen, being able to grow your confidence, being able to know that you can do something that helps nurture and takes care of not only yourself, but people that you choose, that you love,
Hmm.
is huge.
Yeah. I thank you for that message. So last week we interviewed Dee Dee Trotter. I'm not sure if you're familiar. She's a gold medal winning Olympian who now bakes, and she had a similar message, as yours. And I what I want is this is the purpose of the Cake Therapy podcast, is to bring like-minded or unlike-minded individuals who've tapped into their inner art, the inner artist within them, to be able to come and say, talk therapy is important,
Yeah.
but then alternative forms exist, and we want you to use those tools so that you can be, better individuals or
Yeah.
contributing individuals to the community.
Absolutely.
So what's in the works for Cake Therapy, Culinary Art Therapy, and Julie?
So every day is something new. I am constantly, this is a progression for me too. My practice is always evolving. I think it's so important for us as humans to constantly be evolving and learning and growing and practicing. So I
Mhm.
I am doing that as well, and I learn, every time I get to have conversations with other great people, I learn as well.
Mhm.
And I wrote a curriculum that I offer to other practitioners in the field who want to do this kind of work.
Yeah.
So I'm continuing to get that out into the world. Maybe a book might be in the future one day. We will
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
Um, but it's always about, being able to help as many people as I can, however I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know at the top of the conversation you had mentioned about a community of like-minded individuals getting together and, being intentional about spreading the word, but not just only the word. What is the message that you're sending to individuals, such as myself, who want to do this work?
Yeah.
Just leave a tad bit of encouragement for other individuals who see this and want to get into this space.
Just know that unlike when I got started and I thought I was the only crazy person with this out there idea, um, there's a lot of us. There are a lot of us throughout all places of the world, which has been so exciting to be able to meet people.
Mhm.
And it's growing. It's
Yeah.
gonna only get bigger and better. And I welcome and encourage everyone who wants to be a part of it to know that there's a place for you.
Yeah.
This hopefully, meant years from now, hopefully not that long for now, but one day this will become a known, recognized field
Mhm.
that only more people will be excited about and be positively impacted from.
Yeah. You know what excites me too about these groups or individuals such as yourself, it authenticates my own personal experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That I
absolutely.
have like come into with food and the importance of that engagement. So I'm really excited like you about the future
Yeah.
the future of food, how it complements
Yeah.
talk therapy and how it potentially changes other people's lives going forward. So tell us, the listeners, I know where to find you, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Share with our listeners how they can find you.
Sure. So definitely find me on Instagram at Culinary Art Therapy, Facebook too. And of course, feel free. My website, email me. My website is www.culinaryarttherapy.com. And my email is culinaryarttherapy@gmail.com.
Yeah, and make sure you sign up for a session with Julie. Like she does virtual sessions, so you can get your virtual appointments in. What I want you to, follow Julie as well on social media, like she had mentioned her handles on Facebook. And also, I'm asking you to support the Cake Therapy Foundation. You can go to Buy Me a Coffee and support our podcast there and our foundation to keep helping girls and individuals with like minds like Julie and I who believe that there's power in baking and cooking. I want to thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your expertise. And we're going to have Julie back. She is the expert in the space.
Can't
So,
wait.
yeah. So thank you so much, Julie, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure.
It was a pleasure to have you, and I'm honored that you've said yes to us.
Of
So,
course.
yeah. So, thank you for joining the Cake Therapy podcast. Your slice of joy and healing is Mrs. Julie Ohana, from Culinary Art Therapy. So,
Thank
thank
you for
you.
tuning in to the Cake Therapy Podcast. Your support means the world to us. Let us know what you thought about today's episode in the comment section. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you found the conversation helpful, please share it with a friend. Also, follow Sugar Spoon Desserts on all social media platforms. We invite you to support Cake Therapy and the work we do with our foundation by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or by visiting the Cake Therapy website and making a donation. All your support will go towards the Cake Therapy Foundation and the work we are doing to help women and girls. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.